Testing 1, 2.
Welcome to my talks from a blistering Durban. These are talks that are aimed to strengthen our muscle of resilience. When I was a teenager, I visited a place called God's Window in Mpumalanga, South Africa. God's Window is this beautiful, beautiful view from the top of a mountain where you look over and you see forests unfolding as if going into infinity. It's awe-inspiring, breathtaking. But I remember going back to the minivan, the minibus that we were traveling in, and there was Janet. And Janet was sitting in her seat. She hadn't left the bus. I looked at her and I said, Janet, are you not going to go and see the view? She looked at me and grumbled that it's just another view, just another mountain, and she wants to go home. How incredible is that? That two people can be in the same situation, have the same resources, but yet see things totally differently. This is what we call the mystery of consciousness, the strange phenomenon of seeing it differently. Now, a word to describe this is called perspective. Perspective ultimately is what we see and what we interpret in what we're seeing. Now, some perspectives are good, they're helpful, they move me forward. And then other perspectives are limiting, potentially toxic, maybe even dangerous. Now, there's some good news here, or so I think. If people can have a multitude of perspectives around a given situation, that probably means that we can adapt or adopt or change our perspective. And if we can change our perspective, then it means perspective is a choice. Change means we can choose. And if we can choose our perspective, well, then it means that there's learnable skills that we can do to improve the quality of our perspective taking. Now, there's an interesting term, perspective taking. Perspective taking is the mindful practice of purposefully increasing the quality of that which you're seeing. When we do perspective taking and we improve our ability to do this, we see more. Or we see familiar things in new, unfamiliar ways, almost like the beginner's mindset. Or perhaps we are seeing context, more sensitive to context. And understanding context often is everything. Or perhaps we might be able to place things better, where we're not overemphasizing or underemphasizing something. And perspective taking is also about giving something a correct interpretation. You might have heard the phrase, sometimes we give things meaning they don't deserve. Now, I don't know about you, but 21, 22 has been tough years, pandemic. And as we end 21 and go into 22 and there's rumors of waves, what is the perspective taking we should have as we enter this new year? I'm going to give you 5 quick thoughts, and we're going to run through these very, very quickly, but I'm hoping these will support you in moving into a healthy perspective taking place where you are choosing to grow and to learn, because ultimately perspective is a choice. So let's start off with the remote. Now, there's this beautiful village in the Western Cape called Great Brack River. I go there when my soul is jaded. For those of you who know South Africa or live in South Africa, it's between George and Mossel Bay. It's a small village, it's a fishing village. It's got this circular road of 5 kilometers. There's 2 bridges, one the far side of the town and one the seaside of the town. On the 4th of January 2017, I woke up early. I wanted to go and see the sunrise. But as I let myself out the complex, I realized that I wasn't going to see a sunrise because it was starting to rain and it was this heavy, misty cloud. Nonetheless, I love running in the rain, so that didn't stop me, and off I went. And as I was running in the rain, it was just so awesome because I was alone. There was solitude. Nobody else was awake. Why would they be awake? And it's as if I owned the road. I ran in the middle of the road. It was brilliant. I then had this idea which said, well, I'm not going to see a sunrise. I think I'm going to jump into the river on the far side of the village. That's what you do when you're all by yourself, 5 o'clock in the morning, isn't it? But as I was running, I began to become aware of my right hand, which was clutching the remote that I had used to let myself out the complex. And as the rain started to come down harder, I clutched the remote tighter and tighter. When I got to the bridge, I still had not resolved the question, what to do with the remote. So as a result, I carried on running, had a fantastic run, but the run could have been the best ever if it hadn't been for the remote that was in my hand. Now the remote is something we call attachments. These are things we hold on to. And sometimes we hold on to some things far longer than we should. Here's a quote by Alvin Toffler. Just listen to this. Really, really magical and powerful. He says, "The illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." It's quite powerful. Unlearn, relearn. Most of us in this world in which we're living in have to let go of certain competencies. We might need to let go of certain status roles. We might need to let go of certain emotions. We might let go of certain seasons in which we're still living in, which have actually come to an end. Perspective taking realizes that nothing is permanent. There is an impermanence to everything. The weather outside, the wind blowing, the coming into the heat of summer in Durban is a reminder to all of us that life is moving. The universe is carrying on. And we can't hold on, but we need to let go. Perspective taking is the willingness to ponder and say, what do I need to let go of? Cool, that's the remote. Let's go to the ice. So we've got the remote, the ice. There was this brilliant social science experiment that was done, and I got to learn about it through Adam Grant's writings. Now, when I started working, I worked for an organization that works with pallets. And one of the things that I had to do one day was go into a cold storage unit and count pallets. I was in the cold storage unit for about an hour. It was freezing. It was painful. Now, the social science experiment that I want to quickly share with you was asking the question, how painful would it be to be in a cold storage unit for a certain amount of time? I sort of had the answer because of past experience. But what they did is they took one group and they asked these guys, how painful do you think it will be? And the guys gave it a score. They then took another group and they got these people to put their hand in a bucket of ice. And their hand was in a bucket of ice for 10 minutes, and then they were asked the question, how painful would it be? Then they had a third group. The third group put their hand in the bucket of ice. They kept it there for 10 minutes. And then they took their hand out of the ice for 10 minutes. And then they were asked the question. So 3 groups. One group, no ice. Second group, hand in the ice, answer the question. Third group, hand in the ice, hand out the ice for a while, and then answer the question. Now here's the interesting findings of this social science experiment. The group that predicted that it would be the most painful was the second group, the group that's got their hand in the ice. I think that makes sense because your hand's feeling the soreness, the cruelty of the cold, and hence you're probably going to score it a lot higher. But something very interesting then came out about the third group. The third group who had their hand in the ice and then took it out scored very similarly to the first group, meaning they quickly forgot the pain. Now there's a dark side to this experiment in sense of findings, and there's a good side, and they both give us valuable lessons in terms of perspective. The dark side. As humans, we can quickly forget the severity of some of our experiences. And when I forget the cruelty, the hardship that I might have experienced once in my life, I am probably going to lack empathy for somebody who is going through a certain amount of pain. Now let's take COVID for example. For some people, COVID put them into the arena for the very, very first time. Some people have grown up in very privileged backgrounds and they generally are in control of their life. But suddenly came March 2020 and the question, what am I going to do, probably surfaced. And it was probably very uncomfortable, something that they didn't enjoy. But here's the thought. Some people live their lives every day like that. Every day their life is uncertain. Every day they may be thinking, where's my next meal coming from? And perspective is recognizing some of our past experiences so that we can connect better with those who are going through challenge. A lack of perspective is unfortunately what the research shows us in this experiment. We quickly forget. So here's the second question. What from the past 2 years should you not forget? And in not forgetting, it helps you to connect with people. But let's go to the good side of this experiment. A superpower that we as human beings have is the ability to retell a story. Now, there might be a time of healing and digestion that needs to take place. But a couple of weeks ago, I went on a hike with some people. It was people from a workshop that we were doing. And in the afternoon, we did a 12-kilometer hike in the Drakensberg. Now, the hike starts off with 3 kilometers of sheer climbing. And you can just imagine a group of fairly unfit people doing this walk, and they're saying to themselves as they're doing these first 3 kilometers, whose idea was this? This is stupid. I don't want to do this. I want to turn back. And lots of complaints and not so cool language coming out as the people are battling and trying to fathom this walkout. I kept saying to them, guys, hang on, in a few hours' time, we're going to be retelling this story. And guess what? The horrible parts are going to be amplified. We're going to honor them, and we're going to laugh, and we're going to probably go back, and we're going to say to our families, hey, we went on this amazing hike. Yes, it was tough. Yes, it was difficult, but it was absolutely amazing. In actual fact, a couple of people post the hike began to make resolutions about getting fit again so that they can do more of this. How powerful is it that we can often retell stories? So the ice teaches me not to forget the pain for the purpose of connecting with people and what they're going through. But the ice also reminds me that whatever it is that I'm going through now, there might come a time in my life where I look back and I retell it. And now it's told with a sense of growth and learning. Great, so we've got the remote, we've got the ice, we're halfway there. Let's go to the 4th lesson, or the story number 3. About a year ago, I started to devour Walter Isaacson's autobiography on Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci was an absolute genius. And how about this for a great quote? When he was being pressurized to deliver some work, in actual fact, the Last Supper, he said to the person who had wanted his skills, for whom he was doing this, he said, the greatest geniuses accomplish more by doing less. Imagine saying that to your boss. Now, Da Vinci was a genius, absolute genius, and he revolutionized art. And one of the ways in which he revolutionized art was he began to focus on the shadows. And Da Vinci realized that in order for his art to have life, in order for his art to have a sense of motion, you know, when you look at the Mona Lisa and you think she's smiling at me, in order for the art to have that almost living, breathing soul to it, you have to get the shadows right. The secret is in the shadows. Now, most of us don't like to go into the shadows because the shadows is where it's ambiguous. Those who had come before Da Vinci, the great artists, focused on the contour lines, the sharp lines. Da Vinci didn't focus on the sharp lines. He went into those places where we most don't want to go. Here's the deal. Whenever I make snap impressions, whenever I make default assumptions, most often I'm making them from the information that is readily available right now in front of me. But perspective taking says there's probably more to know. But to find those subtleties, you've got to go beneath the surface. You've got to dig. Now, one of the areas that's a shadow for many of us are our emotions. As a kid growing up, a boy, I was sort of taught, big boys school, don't show emotions. You know, definitely don't be vulnerable. Whatever you do, never ever cry. Just be sort of the straight line of emotion. And today I look back and I realize what a handicap that type of teaching has been. Now, our emotions are the shadows, and when we're prepared to slow down and gain perspective on what's going on inside, we begin to find such great perspective that moves us forward. One of my favorite writers and authors is a lady called Susan David. She's South African, she lives in America, she's a great TED talker, wrote a book called Emotional Agility. And she says this, she says, learning to label our emotions with a more nuanced vocabulary can be absolutely transformative. People who have a broad spectrum for emotions, who realize how loneliness differs from sadness or anxiety or nervousness or pity, do much, much better at navigating life. And one of the things that I've learned as I go into the shadows of my emotions is to name them. What is this that I'm feeling? Now here's an interesting experiment. If you say to somebody else their emotion and you name it, they probably will correct you. So if I say to John, hey John, I can see that you're angry. He might look at me and say, no, I'm not angry, I'm frustrated. You should try it. It's actually quite interesting that people correct the naming of their emotion. Do we name our own? Now once I've named the emotion, I now need to own it. And sometimes I need to just say that to myself, the emotion that I'm experiencing at the moment within this pandemic is, and by the way, if you're like me, these emotions are changing all the time. But I need to go into them and say, the emotion I'm experiencing right now is. And then I might say, of course. Give myself permission to be there. Of course you're feeling a little bit nervous. Of course. It's okay. But I want to include and transcend, so I need to own it. And then as per Susan David, she says, ask yourself the question, what's the function of this emotion? What's it telling me? Now sometimes it might be telling us something about ourselves, or it might be telling us something to do. It's very interesting, most innovations came about because somebody got angry. Now when last did you hear, don't get angry? Sometimes we need to get angry because angry is telling us that's wrong with the world. Obviously we've got to control it and regulate it, and there's a time and place. But sometimes the emotion of anger is saying something's wrong. Sometimes the emotion of anxiety is saying there's something you're not doing that you need to do. The emotion of loneliness is just telling us, pick up the phone, reach out. If you need a friend, you need to be a friend. Make the contact. And that's the shadows. So let me ask you this question. What emotion, overwhelming emotion, are you experiencing right now as we head into 2022? What's it telling you? Play with it, ponder it. Perspective taking will increase. Finally, so we've got the remote, we've got the ice, the good and the bad, and now we've got the shadows. Let's go to an ancient word. I grew up in a neighborhood where I had a lot of Jewish friends. And as a result of my friendship with them, I got to know a little bit about their faith and some of the words in their faith. And one of the words that I personally have fallen in love with is this word shalom. I'm sure most of us are familiar with it. Shalom means peace. The challenge with peace from an English perspective is it doesn't tell the full story. So let me ask this question. In war, there is an absence of peace. Makes sense. So war, there is an absence of peace. Does that mean that peace is therefore the absence of war? Now that might sound a little bit strange. You might need to think that one over. Is peace therefore the absence of war? Now we know the answer to this. I might not have a battle to fight in my personal life, but I might not be at peace. I might be all over the show, yet there should be no reason why I'm not at peace. And shalom means so much more, and it takes this into account. It says peace is not the absence of war, but peace is rather everything in its right place. Imagine I go into your kitchen and you've got this beautiful kitchen and it's clean, it's tidy, but then I look at it and I say, how strange that you've got a dustbin the size of a dining room table, and you've got a dining room table the size of a dustbin. And I would look at this and there would be peace, there would be cleanliness, but I'd say something's out of place here. The dustbin is over amplified and the dining room table is under-amplified. Now, perspective taking is about the ability for us to notice what is being overdone. What is something where we are paying too much energy or giving too much energy and time to? And what is something that's so important, but we're not giving it that space and that place? Shalom, everything is in its right place. Liz Gilbert tells the story of Oprah Winfrey, and apparently Oprah was once asked by a person who was trying to raise money for children to give money. And Oprah said no. And the person was surprised, so she responded to Oprah and said, "But Oprah, you love the children." And Oprah responded and said, "I do love the children, but not all the children." Now that might sound a little bit harsh, but I think Oprah's right. It's impossible for her to be solving the problems of all the children in the world. Sometimes it's possible that I care too much about a situation. Sometimes it's possible that I'm too involved in something and I need to say no and move out of it. Sometimes it's possible that something that is so important to me is being ignored because I'm running after so many other things as well. And so perspective is this ability to look in our kitchen and say, that dustbin needs to be made a lot smaller and that table needs to become a lot bigger. So as we enter into 2022, I'm hoping that you can remember the remote. Possibly there's something you need to let go of and you need to open your hand. To be the minimalist, to find something new, you have to let something else go. Love that thought. Maybe it's the ice, your hand in a bucket, and you need to remember something as you go into 2022 because that hard experience has taught you, and those lessons on that teaching can help you with people. Other people, empathy. Or perhaps it's the positive side of the ice bucket story, whereas you go into 2022, there's something that needs to be retold. All right? Remember, the healing needs to take place where we get to that stage where we can retell. Or perhaps it's about the shadows where you need to become comfortable with something like your emotions and say, I'm going to own this. Or perhaps it's that beautiful ancient word where it says, in order for me to have perspective taking, I need a place. Remember, if we have perspective, if we choose our perspectives, if we develop the skills to create healthy perspectives, we are probably going to walk through 2022 with a greater sense of resilience and a greater sense of resolve, and it can be a fantastic, great year, regardless of the fourth waves and whatever else comes our way. And that's our wish for you as we start 2022. This has been a mic talk, and we hope it strengthens your muscle of resilience.